we're obviously really interested in what you're doing because you're trying to make your trip as sustainable as possible. But whereabouts are you in Scotland at the moment?
Hi, Kate. So we are currently sitting in Oban on the west coast of Scotland. This is actually the second time we visited Oban because we're now spending 2 months cruising on the west coast of Scotland. The lockdown has had a bit of an impact on our schedule, so we're not going to be able to go over to the Baltic this year as hoped originally. But this gives us more opportunity to explore Scotland, and we see that as having plenty of benefits as well.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the boat and its name and what it means?
So Carriad is a westerly Corsair, so a British-built boat from 1984. We bought her back in July last year, specifically for this trip. To be honest, she's our house deposit, and we put a lot of other things on hold just so we could do this trip in 2020. So the boat is 36 feet or 11 meters long. We've got a fairly decent aft cabin that we stay in. We've also got a forward cabin for guests. We've got loads of stowage, and she's a sloop, a very conventional sailing yacht with a centre cockpit, which means that she's not that fast going upwind, but she's very safe, and she's got plenty of stowage for all of our stuff.
So where did it all really start for both of you in terms of your interest in boating and then leading on to wanting to do this adventure really?
So we've been sailing together since we've known each other. Colin's sailed since he was a child and has worked his way up, sort of hiring out boats with his dad and then with friends. And you now volunteer with a sail training charity in Wales, Challenge Wales. So Colin does a lot of sailing, and when we met, he taught me to sail, and I worked my way up and did my day skipper, and then together we've done quite a bit of kind of safety training. We've done our first aid at sea and our sea survival course, and we were just enjoying it as a sort of a weekend hobby. And then we got married 2 years ago, and decided that before we settled down any further and bought a bigger house and did anything more, we should go on an adventure. And we had a kind of a tick list of different adventures, and they included things like hiking long distance and doing all sorts of things. And in the end, we settled on buying a boat and going sailing for 8 months, primarily because we knew that we could then bring people with us. So we don't just want to go on sort of a wild adventure somewhere. We like having people come and join it with us, so friends and family. And we thought if we buy a boat, we can host people. So then it led up to looking for the boat in 2018, and we found her in 2019 and bought her, and then did her up over 9 months. So we did a lot of the work ourselves, and then just had a few experts come in and do some sort of fittings and installations for us. And then we set off in March. So we've gone on sabbatical from our jobs for 9 months, and we're just using the opportunity, making the most of it now. And then, as Colin said, we're going to sell the boat on eventually and use it as our house deposit in the future.
Obviously, you guys set sail back in beginning of March from Bristol area, and then COVID-19 happens, and you were kind of on your way to Northern Ireland, and ended up being in lockdown over there. So how was that experience when you arrived there, and how long were you there for in the end?
So it definitely was an experience, and it was, thinking back now we've moved on from it, it was a really good experience. It was really positive, and we've got so many stories from our time when we were there. Obviously we knew that the lockdown was coming, and we don't have a home berth because we're sailing for 8 months. We didn't have somewhere we could return to, so we needed to find somewhere safe primarily to be. And ideally not too expensive, otherwise we would have had all our money gone during the lockdown. So we were invited to go to Strangford Lough and pick up a mooring, and so we arrived feeling quite excited. But when we actually got to the boat club, they had unfortunately been forced to close completely because of the pandemic, and so we couldn't use their moorings as planned. And we had a rather frantic few hours on the phone, calling every single contact we could find that we'd met on our journey so far, just desperately saying, anything you've got, any buoy, any pontoon, any space, please. We need somewhere to go, because as of tomorrow we're not going to be allowed to move our boat. And we just got really lucky and were put in touch with a man who runs a business on Strangford Lough. They lay the moorings in the loch, and he basically said, well, come alongside my pontoon, my workboat's on the outside, you can come inside, stay as long as you like, we've got water and power. And he sort of said, when can you arrive? And we said, we're about 10 minutes away. Can we come right now? And we literally motored around the corner and just, tied up on this pontoon, and we're just so grateful. And the Matt was absolutely lovely, really welcoming, gave us kind of all the help we needed about, where we were, because we were in the middle of nowhere. Strangford Lough is not very densely populated at all. But yeah, he sort of told us where we could find shops and where we could find what we needed, and we ended up being there 11 weeks. 11 weeks on the pontoon. So we treated it as that was our new home, so we followed all of the lockdown guidance, in that we never traveled more than 5 miles. We just did our one lot of exercise a day. We traveled to the shops when we needed to, but we sort of imagined ourselves as being locals to that area. And we just had the most wonderful reception from the people there. We bumped into people who of course recognized us as not being from the local area, and they would say, what are you doing here, where have you come from? And we would say, oh, we live on that yacht over there. And yeah, by the end of the first day we'd had some little pints of milk delivered to the end of the pontoon, and people were just really keen to help. And yeah, by the end of the time we've made some great friends. We had a lovely family who allowed us to sort of borrow tools if we needed them, and we used their bins and their recycling facilities. And another family said that we could use their washing machine because it was in their garden, so we wouldn't have to go into their house and come into contact with them. So once a week we would cycle our laundry around to their house, and we would hang it up in their garden. So yeah, really grateful for that. But we busied ourselves really with doing up Carriad. We did loads of jobs on her that we would never have got done if we'd been cruising. Probably the biggest job is we've refurbished the whole of the cabin sole. So we sanded and re-waxed all of our floorboards. And that was just one of the jobs. We've really blitzed so many different things that we didn't think we'd have time to do. It was a really productive 11 weeks. It was good.
We did a 70-mile passage from Malahide in Ireland. Bear in mind at this time we were really racing the clock, knowing that Ireland or Northern Ireland were going to implement a lockdown. So we were about to set off from Malahide to make the 70-mile passage to Strangford Lough, and we tried to go astern out of our berth, and the engine throttle had failed. So we frantically got back into the berth and struggled to decide what to do. We managed to rig up a new throttle made of string and go anyway, because that was the time pressure we were under. And as soon as we were out of the river at Malahide, we had just the most fantastic sailing conditions. So we made the trip up to the loch in little over 11 hours. You're absolutely right, though. The tides run strongly there, and the delay with the throttle added a couple of hours to our arrival time. At which point the spring tides were running at about 7 knots into Strangford Lough. But we had prepared for that. We did a pilotage plan. We knew what bearings we had to follow to lead us safely through the hazards at the entrance. We knew which lights to look out for because it would be going dark when we arrived. And we shot into the Narrows at about 11 knots, and then made out the pontoon we were going to use for the night in Strangford. Turned to port. We weaved our way through the moorings, tied on, and sighed a big sigh of relief.
Yeah, there's lots of sort of low-lying banks in Strangford Lough around the edges, so you've got to be really careful.
They call them pladdies in Northern Ireland, and a lot of them aren't marked, so you can park very neatly on a pladdie.
So we did the rest of the loch in the daylight, so we could avoid those, but we just spent our first night right in the entrance. So once you could go sailing, do day sails and come back to where you started, we wanted to get back in the swing of sailing again. We spent a few nights away at anchor in different locations, And by absolute coincidence, we'd picked up a mooring down right near the entrance of the loch again. And we had a few messages come through from these friends we'd made during our time in the loch saying, there's orcas. And we thought, oh, great. Was this earlier the day? They said, no, half an hour ago. And so all we had to do was come out of the boat and sit up on deck. And within 15 minutes, we could see first cars and people on the other bank who were just crowding around, just following these orcas as they came back out of the loch.
Okay.
And we watched as they transited maybe 300 or 400 meters away from the boat, just silently between the surface, and then you see these two enormous black dorsal fins come out, and they take a breath, and then they'd carry on again, a bit like dolphins but in slow motion. And although a few other boats had actually gone out to go and see the wildlife themselves, and in our opinion, we're getting quite close. We had a great view just sitting on the boat, and then we watched them leave the loch, and sadly that could be for the last time, because those are the last two members of a dwindling pod of orcas that reside in the Irish Sea and on the west coast of Scotland. They have names. The whale watchers know exactly who they were, and so we managed to see something that hadn't happened for 26 years and might never happen again. So that was certainly one of our top wildlife experiences while we've been away.
As part of your trip, you're trying to be as sustainable as possible, and obviously you're going to experience lots of wildlife, especially in Scotland as well. And I'm sure you've been sort of adopting good practice to sort of minimise any disturbance where possible. Can you give me some examples of maybe what you've been doing in terms of that?
Yeah, so we sort of pre-planned wildlife spotting for Colin's birthday. I bought him some seabird guides and some cetacean guides. So we've actually, we tend to have them in the cockpit when we're sailing. So they're sort of laminated guides, and it just helps us see, sort of helps us know what we're looking at. And we've got the binoculars just by our companionway, so we can grab out the binoculars when we see something. But generally, if we do spot something in the water, particularly if we're motoring, we slow right down and just slow the sound and speed of the propeller, and just sort of wait and see what happens. So if we can avoid things, we do, and if we just need to sort of wait and just float, we sort of see what happens. And generally, we find things come to you if they want to, and we do whatever we can to make sure things don't fly away or swim away from us, because we want to watch them for as long as possible. And it's been very noticeable during lockdown. There have been far fewer boats on the water, and we wonder if we might have seen slightly more wildlife as a result, because there's less disturbance. And we saw on our way into Scotland, we were the only boat coming up through the Sound of Jura, which is quite a big, wide, open body of water. And we were lucky enough to actually see a minke whale.
Oh, wow.
And we could see it through the binoculars, and it was probably about a mile away when we first saw it. So it had a little fin, and it looked a bit like a dolphin. And we just turned the propeller off and just sort of floated in the water. And about a minute or two later, it surfaced 30 or 40 meters just behind the boat. So it came right across the loch towards us and surfaced. And so we just sat in the cockpit and just watched it, and it just carried on. Didn't seem bothered by us, and just carried on its sort of transit across the loch. So wherever we can, we use our binoculars and we just look at things from a distance, because often you'll see them for longer in that way, because they're not being disturbed by you. So they just carry on with their business, feeding or whatever it is they're doing.
In terms of sustainability as well, I know you've been adding a few things to Carriad and to improve her sustainability credentials. What have you been doing?
Well, we haven't made very many big or complex or expensive changes to the boat to try and reduce the amount of waste that comes along with our trip. I would say the biggest change we've made has been all of our washing up liquids, all of our our body care products, laundry stuff, hand wash. We now will buy that in bulk in 5 litre containers, which are all from and they're all products that are specially formulated to be disposed of at sea, or to have minimal impact. And so that's a double whammy really, because then when we shower, when our guests shower on board, we know that they're not putting anything into the water. And then of course we're also producing a lot less plastic waste from all the smaller containers that you might be tempted to buy. And even just on a practical level, that just means that the recycling bin doesn't fill up as fast.
Yeah.
But the other big change we made was the addition of a black water tank. So this takes the waste from one of our heads into a 60-litre tank that's in the aft cabin, in the cockpit. Now that did have to be professionally fitted, and it cost around £900 to do that. But it has been a revelation to us, because if we want to go into a marina, if we want to go into a lovely bay like Tinker's Hole on the west side of Mull, or if we want to explore any of the canal network, we know that we can just freely use that heads for a number of days, and discharge absolutely no effluent into the water. We started to get our head around what a black water tank can do when we sail in Croatia, where they're all mandatory. And when you open the tank, when you're sufficiently far off water, far off land, you can see the impact of that. And so we really liked then not doing that anywhere near the coast. So that's probably the biggest sustainability related mod we made to Carriad.
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, we have quite few pump out facilities compared to other countries in the EU, and of course it's not something that's currently illegal to pump sewage out into the water, but we know that it is raw sewage and it is untreated. And I think as boaters, we need to have that conscientious mind of, do we want to be doing that? And even though there's not many pump out facilities available to us, having a holding tank, like you said, enables you to hold on to that raw sewage if you're in a very environmentally sensitive area, or where there might be other swimmers or bathers, and that means you can even potentially discharge further out to sea when you're away from that, or when you do find a pump out facility. Have you spotted any up in Scotland, any of those facilities to use yet?
No, we've seen more of them actually in Scotland than we have seen on the south coast of the UK. And we know that certain marinas on the south coast charge for the facility because it's not used widely, whereas up here, a bit more like Europe, the pump out does seem to be free. But there's lots of areas here actually with strong tides, and it doesn't take you that long to get into somewhere where to get into very deep water, where actually just being able to discharge what you've held on to is going to have much less impact. So this is a good place to get your head around how to use a black water tank.
Yeah, brilliant.
Oh, sorry, yeah, go on. When we were in Northern Ireland during the lockdown, I sort of forgot to mention, it was a bit of a dilemma. What do we do if we're living on a boat for 11 weeks with a 40-litre holding tank, 60-litre holding tank? That's not going to last very long. And we actually contacted the council and asked if we could use their public toilet, so that we wouldn't be having to discharge any waste into Strangford Lough, because it is a protected area. And they told us that unfortunately the toilets had closed. But we went back and sort of reiterated our case that we really needed the facilities, because we didn't want to be using our waste discharging from the boat. And in the end, they were very kind to actually give us a key to the toilets. So the toilets remained closed, but we were allowed to use them for the duration of our stay. And so actually, I think sometimes if you ask the question as a boater, you can get a positive response back if you explain why it is that you want the facility, or the ability to pump out, or whatever it is. You can actually get a positive response. So that was really useful for us while we were there.
Yeah. In terms of anything else on the boat, is there anything that you'd like to share with the viewers, of any top tips for sustainability?
Food waste goes in one place, normal domestic waste goes in another, and we had another bin for recycling, exactly as you do at home. But yachts that have been, I mean, even modern yachts just don't seem to have multiple waste receptacles built in. So we jigged things around when we arrived, and the bottom step of the companionway, which would normally be used for winch handles and things, that's now the recycling step. And so just by having a dedicated area for recycling waste, we separate it as we use it, and it makes it much easier just to grab that when you're in a marina and put it all in the dry mixed recycling. It also means that the bin itself fills up a lot less fast, because the recycling waste, when that gets full, it's normally clean and dry enough just to put in a locker somewhere and it won't smell. Yeah. So actually that means that we can go longer without having to dump our waste, and then when we do dump it, we can separate it into the right areas.
Yeah. I think food has a big impact on our sort of waste, our production of waste or lack of, and we're really into food. We love cooking, we love eating well. We've eaten really well on this trip so far, and whenever we find fresh food, we just buy it. So we found a lovely little shop the other day, so we've got some fresh fruit and veg hanging up above Colin's head. We try and cook everything from fresh. We whenever we've got fresh food, we cook it. We don't have a freezer on board, so everything is just in the fridge, so we can only ever sort of have on board as much as we can eat at that time. But then we have a great big store of tins and cartons, as most sailors will know, is what you resort to when all the fresh has gone. But one of the key things we've done for this trip, which is more relevant to a very long passage, but I think is quite applicable to any sort of boater, is just buying things in bulk. So for instance, when we first set off on the trip, we had a 5 kilo bag of oats. That bag was stuffed to the back of the locker, filling a space at the back. But then we have a much smaller container that we decant into, and then that's what we use day to day for making our breakfast, for instance. Colin has it there. So there are oats in there, but then the 5 kilo bag is hiding at the back of the locker, out of the way. And we do a similar sort of thing. We love granola. We love breakfast in general, but we make our own granola, and we bought our nuts and our seeds and our oats in kilo bags, maybe even 5 kilo bags. And then we've just been working our way through those over the last few months. And then about once every 2 weeks, we make a new batch and we put it in again in a little jar. So up above us here, most things are decanted into smaller jars, which we can use. And then in the back of the cupboards, where you don't want to rummage too often, are the much bigger plastic bags. But overall, it means we use less plastic, we get through less. And I suppose we don't run out of things as often as well. Quite often you struggle or can struggle when you're shopping in small marina shops, because they sell things in small portions. They sell small bags of pasta and rice. And it means you have to buy more regularly, and so we found that whenever we do find a supermarket, we just buy very large quantities. And in the moment, it's heavy, and it can feel like a sort of slightly trickier option, but in the long run, it is a lot easier, because you don't have to think about running out of things so regularly.
Yeah,
and because we do a bit of a binge of fresh food when we get somewhere, a larger shop, or we find a nice grocer's or a farm that does fresh. The use of the nets means that actually we've got somewhere to put the fresh food, that otherwise you might be worrying about rolling around and damaging itself in a container. And then we always cook double portions of virtually every meal, and we've got a very good selection of Tupperwares, which will go in the fridge in any orientation and not leak, and then that makes really easy meals when you're on passage, and you just have to put it in a saucepan or reheat it. And
probably to reiterate the benefit of the Tupperware, we bought so many Tupperwares with us. We've probably got near on 20
different sizes,
varying sizes. We've got enormous great ones that would fit cake, or huge bulk portions of things, right down to the tiniest little Tupperware that will just take half a lemon. If you've had, I don't know, a nice drink with a piece of lemon in the top, and you've got half a lemon, stick it in a Tupperware, and it's amazing how many Tupperwares you can just have piled up in a boat fridge. And even after a really rough sail, everything will be fine, because it's all really well sealed. So we default to just everything lives in a Tupperware, and of course you can clean them, and you don't end up throwing away any waste at the end of it, because you can just wash the Tupperware and reuse it. So that's definitely something we would carry forward if we were going to rent a boat in the future for a holiday. I think we would take Tupperwares with us. They're so useful.
For our people who are joining us, whether they're experienced or not, we've had the time just to produce some joining instructions, which tells them that they don't have to bring shower gel or shampoo because we've got absolutely loads. We can provide them with that, and to make sure that they bring their own refillable water bottle, for instance, which especially nowadays people aren't at all bothered by. And we've got a filter on our tap so that it dispenses nice, tasty filtered water. If people are concerned about drinking from a boat tank, then we can allay those concerns.
And something else that we do when we have guests on board, as I said, we do love food and cooking and eating, and we always make a meal plan for passages. But obviously, it won't be Colin and I cooking every single meal. There might be someone else cooking, and so we make the meal plan, but then we also list what ingredients we have bought to make each of the meals. And that means that if there's someone else in the galley doing the cooking and we're doing the sailing, they will use the ingredients that we've bought, and we won't end up with 16 onions at the end of it that didn't get used in the meal. And we found that quite useful in the past, because people can just they can get on with things themselves, and we don't end up with unused fresh ingredients at the end of it. And that seems to have worked quite well.
A lot of these tips about sustainable sailing are not unique to sailing. They're just how we've developed our systems and our food at home, and so it was actually very easy to translate those onto a boat. So I think the easiest thing for people to do is just do it at home first, and when you get comfortable with your new system, then try it out on a boat.
But thank you so much for your time, and obviously we'll keep in touch with what you're doing, and we'll have another video session later on and see how the rest of your Scottish trip went.